The transport ship's hull groaned against the cosmic winds as it drifted through the Kepler system. Inside the cramped passenger compartment, the Morrison family huddled together on worn metal benches. James Morrison, a tall man with calloused hands from years of farming, kept his arm around his wife Sarah. Their 12-year-old daughter Emma pressed close to her mother's side, clutching a small data pad that displayed pictures of their old home on Earth. Beside them sat the most unusual member of their group, a large, shaggy dog with intelligent amber eyes and fur that seemed to shimmer between black and silver, depending on the light. The dog's name was Koste, though the family simply called him Kos. He had appeared at their farm 3 years ago during a terrible storm, injured and half-starved. Sarah had nursed him back to health, and he had never left their side since. "Papa, when will we reach the colony?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible over the ship's humming engines. James squeezed her shoulder gently. "Soon, sweetheart. The captain said we'd reach New Geneva in 2 days. They were refugees, fleeing the economic collapse that had devastated their farming community on Earth. Like millions of other families, they had sold everything they owned to buy passage to one of the outer colonies, hoping for a fresh start among the stars." Kos lifted his massive head and sniffed the air. His ears perked up and a low rumble escaped his throat. Sarah noticed his tension immediately. "What is it, boy?" she asked softly, scratching behind his ears. But Kos remained alert, his amber eyes fixed on the corridor leading to the ship's bridge. The attack came without warning. Brilliant white lights flooded the ship as massive vessels emerged from hyperspace around them. The transport shuddered violently as tractor beams locked onto its hull. Emergency alarms blared throughout the corridors as the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "This is Captain Reynolds. We are being boarded by Imperial forces. All passengers remain calm and follow the instructions of the boarding party." The Morrison family exchanged frightened glances. The Galactic Empire had been expanding aggressively for decades, conquering independent systems and forcing their populations into servitude. They had thought the outer colonies were safe from Imperial reach. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridors as armored soldiers stormed aboard. The first Imperial trooper to enter their compartment was massive, standing nearly 7 feet tall in gleaming silver armor. His helmet bore the red crest of the Empire's elite guard. Behind him followed a dozen more soldiers, their weapons trained on the terrified passengers. "Citizens of the failed state formerly known as the Earth Alliance," the lead trooper announced through his helmet speakers, "you are now subjects of the Galactic Empire. You will be processed and assigned to appropriate labor facilities." "We're just farmers," James said, standing slowly with his hands raised. "We have no quarrel with the Empire." The trooper's helmet turned toward him. "Your quarrels are irrelevant. All able-bodied humans are needed for the Empire's expansion. You will serve." Sarah held Emma closer as the soldiers began separating families, herding people into different groups. James was pulled away despite his protests, while Sarah and Emma were pushed toward a group of women and children. "Wait," Sarah called out. "What about our dog?" The lead trooper looked down at Kos, who had remained perfectly still during the chaos. "Animals are not permitted in Imperial facilities. It will be disposed of." "No," Emma screamed, breaking free from her mother and throwing her arms around Kos's neck. "He's family. You can't hurt him." The trooper raised his weapon toward the dog, but something strange happened. The ship's lights flickered, and for a moment the air itself seemed to grow thick and oppressive. Several soldiers took an involuntary step backward as Kos fixed his amber eyes on the trooper's helmet. "The animal shows aggression," another soldier reported nervously. "Perhaps we should—" "Silence!" the lead trooper snapped. "It's just a beast." But even he seemed unsettled by the dog's unwavering stare. Sarah quickly stepped forward and gently pulled Emma away from Kos. "Please," she begged. "He's just an old farm dog. He won't cause any trouble. Can't he come with us?" The trooper considered for a moment. Imperial regulations were clear about animals, but the dog had shown no aggression despite the chaos around it. Perhaps it could be useful for labor or entertainment. "Very well," he decided. "The animal may accompany you to the processing facility, but if it causes any problems, it will be terminated immediately." Relief flooded through the family as they were herded toward the Empire's transport ships. Kos walked calmly beside them, but Sarah noticed something odd. Despite the chaos and shouting around them, other animals on the ship, service pets, livestock being transported to the colonies, all fell silent when Kos passed by. Even the ship's mice and rats seemed to disappear from sight. The Imperial transport was a massive vessel designed for moving large numbers of prisoners. The Morrison family found themselves crammed into a holding bay with hundreds of other refugees. The air was stale and recycled, and the only light came from harsh fluorescent strips mounted on the ceiling. Kos lay quietly at their feet, but Sarah could feel the tension radiating from his body. His amber eyes scanned the crowded bay constantly as if he were memorizing every face, every detail. "Mama," Emma whispered. "Kos feels different, like he's angry." Sarah looked down at the dog who had been their faithful companion for 3 years. She had always thought there was something special about him. The way he seemed to understand human speech perfectly, how he never got sick or injured, how wildlife would gather around him sometimes as if paying their respects. But now, in the cold light of the Imperial transport, she wondered if there was more to Kos than she had ever imagined. Hours passed as more prisoners were loaded onto the transport. Finally, the massive ship's engines roared to life, and they felt the familiar sensation of acceleration as they entered hyperspace. Their destination was unknown, but Sarah feared it would be one of the Empire's notorious labor colonies, where families were separated and worked until they died. As the transport ship carried them deeper into Imperial space, none of the soldiers or officers noticed the small changes beginning to occur around the seemingly harmless farm dog. Shadows in the corners of the holding bay seemed to move independently of their sources. The temperature dropped several degrees near where Kos lay, and in the deepest levels of hyperspace, something ancient and terrible began to stir, following the scent of its beloved companion across the vast emptiness between the stars. The Imperial Processing Facility on Zarian Prime was a monument to efficiency and control. Massive gray towers stretched toward the planet's orange sky, their surfaces covered with sensors and defensive weapons. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy passed through these facilities daily, stripped of their identities and transformed into numbered workers for the Empire's endless machine. Commander Vex Caloran stood in the observation deck overlooking the main processing floor, watching as the latest transport disgorged its human cargo. The humans were always the most troublesome, too independent, too willing to fight for meaningless concepts like freedom and family. But they were also among the most useful workers once properly broken. "Status report," Caloran commanded, his cybernetic eye whirring as it focused on the crowds below. Lieutenant Drex, a tall reptilian officer with scales that shifted from green to blue under stress, consulted his datapad. Transport Sigma-7 delivered 1,247 human refugees from the Earth system. All are in good health and suitable for labor assignment. There was one minor irregularity. A family was permitted to keep an animal companion. Caloran's organic eye narrowed. "Animal companions are not permitted in Imperial facilities. The boarding commander made an exception, sir. The creature appears docile and the family became agitated when threatened with its removal. Commander Thos felt it was more efficient to allow it, rather than deal with potential resistance." "Weakness," Caloran spat. "The humans must learn that attachment leads only to suffering." "Where is this animal now?" "In holding Bay 7 with the family unit. Cell designation 47B. Down in the processing center, the Morrison family sat on hard metal benches in a small cell, barely large enough for 4 people. The walls were seamless gray metal, broken only by a narrow slot for food delivery and a small window that looked out onto a courtyard, filled with other prisoners. James had been separated from them during the initial sorting. Sent to the male processing wing, Sarah and Emma clung to each other while Kos lay at their feet, his massive form taking up most of the remaining floor space. "When will we see Papa again?" Emma asked for the 10th time since their arrival. Sarah stroked her daughter's hair, fighting back her own tears. "I don't know, sweetheart, but we have to stay strong. Papa would want us to be brave." A guard appeared at their cell window, a hulking humanoid with gray skin and glowing red cybernetic implants. "Food delivery," he announced in a mechanical voice, sliding 2 trays through the slot. Each tray contained a gray paste that supposedly contained all necessary nutrients and a cup of recycled water. "What about him?" Sarah asked, pointing to Kos. The guard looked down at the dog with disinterest. "Animals receive scraps after human feeding is complete." He turned to leave, then paused. "Strange," he muttered to himself. "What's strange?" Sarah asked. The guard touched his cybernetic implants, which were flickering erratically. "Sensor malfunction. Probably needs recalibration. He walked away, not noticing that his implants functioned perfectly normally once he was several yards from their cell. As night fell over the facility, the temperature control systems began malfunctioning throughout their wing. Cell after cell reported equipment failures, from broken communication systems to failing lights. The maintenance crews worked frantically to identify the source of the problems, but every system they repaired would fail again within hours. In cell 47B, Sarah and Emma slept fitfully on the hard benches while Koss remained alert. His amber eyes glowed softly in the darkness, and if anyone had been watching carefully, they might have noticed that the shadows around him moved independently of any light source. Dr. Yaga Marsh, the facility's chief xenobiologist, reviewed the daily reports in her laboratory. She was a thin woman with prematurely gray hair and tired eyes, worn down by years of cataloging and disposing of unwanted alien creatures. When she read about the dog that had been allowed into the facility, she frowned with professional irritation. Bringing unknown animals into a sterile environment, she muttered, the contamination risks alone. She decided to examine the creature personally in the morning. In the command center, Lieutenant Drex was dealing with an increasing number of strange reports. Power fluctuations, equipment failures, and most disturbing of all, several guards reporting nightmares so vivid they had requested medical evaluation. "Sir," a technician called out, "I'm reading some unusual energy patterns from Sector 7. "What kind of patterns?" Drex asked, his scales shifting to a nervous blue-green. "Unknown. The sensors are detecting. Well, this sounds impossible, but it's reading as magical energy." Drex's scales turned bright yellow with alarm. "Magical energy is a primitive concept. Our sensors detect only scientifically measurable phenomena." "Yes, sir, but that's what the readings say. And they're all centered around holding Bay 7. Drex made a note to investigate personally in the morning. Perhaps the human animal was carrying some kind of unknown technology or biological agent. Meanwhile, far from Xerion Prime, in a forest on a small moon that officially didn't exist on any Imperial star charts, something ancient awoke from its slumber, in a hut that stood on massive chicken legs, surrounded by a fence made of human bones that glowed with phosphorescent fire. An old woman opened eyes that had seen the birth and death of civilizations. Baba Yaga, the witch of witches, the guardian of thresholds, the keeper of ancient powers that predated the Empire by millennia, sat up in her bed of moss and starlight. She sniffed the air with a nose that could detect magic across galaxies. Her beloved Kostage was in danger. For 3 years, she had allowed her faithful hound to live among the humans, to experience the simple joy of being a family pet. It had been a gift to him after centuries of faithful service in the dark spaces between worlds, but now someone had dared to cage him, to treat him like a common animal. The witch stood slowly, her bones creaking like ancient trees in a storm. Around her, the forest began to whisper warnings to every creature for miles. Birds fell silent, predators retreated to their dens, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "Iron and steel," she cackled, her voice carrying the sound of grinding millstones. "Ships and weapons, and the arrogance of children playing with forces they cannot comprehend. They think their empire makes them powerful." She walked to her window and looked up at the stars, her gaze somehow crossing impossible distances to see her companion in his cage. The sight of Koste being treated like a mere pet by these metal-clad fools filled her with a rage that hadn't been felt in this galaxy for centuries. "Soon, my faithful one," she whispered, and every electronic device within 1,000 light-years briefly flickered. "Soon they will learn what happens when you cage something that belongs to Baba Yaga." Back on Xerion Prime, Koss lifted his massive head and looked directly up at the ceiling, as if he could see through the metal and stone to the stars beyond. For just a moment, his amber eyes glowed with an inner fire that had nothing to do with reflected light. The hunt was about to begin. Dr. Yaga Marsh arrived at Holding Bay 7 with a portable scanning unit and 2 security guards. The equipment malfunctions throughout the night had left her with little sleep and less patience. She intended to examine this allegedly harmless dog, take tissue samples, and file a report recommending its immediate disposal. "Open the cell," she ordered. The first guard, a massive chronothan with 4 arms and skin like granite, approached the control panel. The moment his finger touched the electronic lock, sparks erupted from the device. He jerked his hand back, examining his burned fingertip with confusion. "Defective equipment," he muttered, trying again. This time the entire control panel exploded in a shower of sparks and smoke. Dr. Marsh sighed and pulled out a manual override key. Primitive solutions for primitive problems, she said, inserting the key into a hidden mechanical lock. The cell door slid open with a grinding sound that suggested the mechanisms were somehow rusted, despite being made of advanced alloys. Inside, Sarah Morrison stood protectively in front of her daughter while Koss remained lying calmly on the floor, his amber eyes tracking Dr. Marsh's every movement. "I need to examine your animal," Dr. Marsh announced, activating her scanner. "This is routine processing. Cooperate and no harm will come to any of you." Sarah reluctantly stepped aside, knowing that resistance would only make things worse for Emma. "His name is Koss," she said quietly. "He's never hurt anyone." Dr. Marsh pointed her scanner at the dog and pressed the activation button. The device immediately began emitting a high-pitched whine, its display showing impossible readings. According to the sensors, the animal was simultaneously alive and dead, organic and inorganic, present and absent. "Malfunctioning equipment," she muttered, adjusting the settings. But every adjustment only made the readings more bizarre. The scanner now insisted that the dog was several thousand years old and contained enough potential energy to power a star destroyer. "Guard, bring me the backup scanner from my laboratory." While they waited, Dr. Marsh approached Koss directly, pulling out a simple visual examination tool, a flashlight and magnifying lens. As she knelt beside the dog, she noticed something odd. The air around him felt different, charged with static electricity that made her hair stand on end. She shined the light into Koss's eyes, expecting to see normal canine pupils. Instead, she found herself looking into depths that seemed to go on forever. For a terrifying moment, she felt as if she were falling through space, tumbling past stars and planets and things that had no names in any language she knew. The flashlight slipped from her numb fingers and clattered to the floor. When she blinked, she was back in the cell, but Koss was no longer lying down. He was sitting upright, his massive head level with hers, and she could swear she saw amusement in those ancient amber eyes. "What are you?" she whispered. The dog tilted his head slightly, and for one impossible moment, Dr. Marsh heard a voice in her mind, not words, but concepts that bypassed language entirely. Old, faithful, protected, bound. And underneath it all, a promise of terrible retribution for those who threatened the innocent. The backup scanner arrived, carried by a nervous technician who reported that every electronic device in the laboratory wing had simultaneously malfunctioned. Dr. Marsh took the new device with shaking hands and pointed it at Koss. This scanner didn't malfunction. It simply refused to activate at all, as if the dog's presence somehow negated technology itself. "Impossible," Dr. Marsh breathed. "No organic being can interfere with Imperial technology." But even as she spoke, she noticed that her cybernetic implants, minor neural enhancements that helped her process xenobiological data, had gone completely offline. For the first time in 20 years, she was thinking with only her organic brain. Throughout the facility, reports of equipment failures cascaded through the command center. Life support systems in Sector 7 were operating on backup power. Surveillance cameras were displaying images of empty corridors when guards could clearly see prisoners in their cells. Most disturbing of all, the facility's main computer had begun displaying error messages in languages that didn't exist in any Imperial database. Commander Kaloran stormed into the command center, his cybernetic eye clicking and whirring as it tried to compensate for system failures. "Report." Lieutenant Drex's scales had turned a sickly gray color. "Sir, we're experiencing cascade failures throughout the entire facility. Primary power is holding, but secondary systems are failing at an accelerating rate. Our technicians can't identify the source." "What about the anomalous energy readings?" "They're intensifying, sir, and—" Drex hesitated, his natural coloration fluctuating rapidly. "Sir, some of the guards are reporting visual hallucinations. They claim to see an old woman walking through the walls." Caloran's organic eye widened. "Hallucinations?" "Yes, sir. Always the same description. An elderly human female with long gray hair wearing primitive clothing. She appears to be searching for something. The hallucinations started approximately 6 hours ago and are becoming more frequent." In the depths of space, Baba Yaga's hut had begun to move. The massive chicken legs that supported it strode through vacuum as easily as through a forest, each step covering thousands of miles. Stars dimmed as she passed, and space itself seemed to bend around her ancient magic. She was done being subtle. With a gesture of her gnarled hand, she sent her awareness racing ahead of her physical form, projecting her presence into the Imperial facility. Let them see her coming. Let them tremble and wonder what force they had awakened. In holding Bay 7, Emma Morrison suddenly sat up straight, her eyes wide with wonder rather than fear. "Mama," she whispered, "there's a grandmother coming. She's looking for Kos." Sarah followed her daughter's gaze to the cell wall where she saw nothing but gray metal, but Kos had risen to his feet, his tail wagging for the first time since their capture. He looked toward the wall with an expression of joy that transformed his entire bearing. Dr. Marsh, still kneeling on the cell floor with her useless equipment, felt reality shifting around her. The walls seemed thinner somehow, as if they were merely suggestions rather than solid barriers, and in the air, she could smell things that had no place in a sterile Imperial facility: wood smoke, forest earth, and herbs that grew in places where magic still remembered its own name. "Guards," she called weakly. "I think we need to evacuate this sector." But the guards were no longer at their posts. They were backing away from the cell, their weapons lowered, their faces pale with instinctive terror. Because on the wall behind the strange dog and his human family, a shadow had appeared. The shadow of an old woman walking with purpose, cast by no light that any of them could see. The shadow raised one gnarled hand and pointed directly at them. Every alarm in the facility began screaming at once. The alarm screaming throughout Xerion Prime facility created a symphony of panic that could be heard for miles. In the command center, every screen displayed the same impossible image: a star chart showing something massive approaching their solar system at speeds that violated every known law of physics. "Sir," a technician shouted over the noise, "our long-range sensors are detecting an object approximately 12 kilometers from our position and closing fast." "But sir, it's not showing up on any standard scanning arrays." Commander Kaloran gripped the command console, his cybernetic eye spinning frantically as it tried to process the contradictory data. "Define not showing up." "The gravitational sensors detect mass, but visual scanners show empty space. Heat sensors detect no engine emissions, but the object is moving at impossible speeds. And, sir," the technician's voice cracked, "the computer keeps identifying it as a wooden structure with organic propulsion systems. That's impossible. Run a full diagnostic on all sensor arrays." "We've run 17 diagnostics, sir. All systems are functioning normally. The object is real and Sir, it appears to be a house on legs." Lieutenant Drek stumbled into the command center, his scales now a panicked bright orange. "Commander, we've lost contact with 17 guard units. The prisoners in Sector 7 are reporting that the walls have become transparent, and some claim to see a forest outside instead of the facility grounds." Kaloran felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of military service: genuine fear. "Seal Sector 7. Lock it down completely. Sir, the electronic locks aren't responding. And the manual override systems, they've turned into wood, sir. Actual wood." In Cell 47B, the Morrison family watched in amazement as their prison transformed around them. The sterile metal walls had indeed become transparent, revealing not the facility's corridors but a moonlit forest clearing where fireflies danced between ancient oak trees. The harsh fluorescent lighting had been replaced by the warm glow of phosphorescent mushrooms that grew in impossible spirals up the corners of their cell. Kos stood with his head high, his tail wagging with pure joy. He barked once, a sound that somehow echoed across dimensions, and from the transparent wall came an answering call. "Grandmother." Emma clapped her hands together. "She's really coming." Through the wall stepped an old woman who seemed to be made of shadow and starlight. She was small and bent with age, her long gray hair flowing around her like smoke. Her dress appeared to be woven from midnight itself, and her feet made no sound as she walked across the cell floor. But her eyes burned with the power of 1,000 dying stars. "My faithful Koste," she said, her voice carrying the sound of wind through winter forests. The dog bounded to her side and she scratched behind his ears with fingers that flickered between flesh and flame. "Have they been kind to you, old friend?" Dr. Marsh, still trapped in the cell with her malfunctioning equipment, pressed herself against the far wall. Her scientific mind tried to categorize what she was seeing, but every explanation crumbled before the reality of magic made manifest. "You're not real," she whispered. "You're a hallucination caused by exposure to unknown energy fields." Baba Yaga turned her burning gaze on the doctor, and Marsh felt her soul being weighed and measured. Reality is a concept invented by those too small to comprehend the universe, the witch said. But you are real enough to answer for your crimes. The old woman looked at Sarah and Emma, her expression softening slightly. Do not fear, little ones. You have shown kindness to one who serves me, and kindness is never forgotten. Are you going to hurt the bad people? Emma asked with the directness of childhood. Baba Yaga smiled, revealing teeth that looked like polished bone. I am going to teach them the difference between taking prisoners and making enemies. In the command center, chaos reigned. Half the facility systems had been replaced by what appeared to be medieval technology that somehow functioned better than imperial engineering. Control panels had become ornate wooden podiums covered in glowing runes that no one could read, but somehow everyone understood. Commander, a voice crackled over the communication system. This is Captain Morrison requesting permission to speak with my family. Calloran frowned. There is no Captain Morrison on this facility. Check your records, the voice replied calmly. A technician pulled up the prisoner database, then stared at his screen in confusion. Sir, according to our files, James Morrison is listed as a retired Imperial Navy captain with full honors and citizenship rights. These records show he was awarded the Star of Valor for actions in the Rigel campaign. That's impossible. He was processed as a refugee. Sir, the computer now shows that arresting Captain Morrison and his family constitutes an act of treason against the Empire. It's recommending immediate release and formal apology. Calloran's cybernetic eye began sparking. The records were altered. Sir, our security logs show no unauthorized access. The changes appear to have been made retroactively. Through the facility's newly transformed corridors, Baba Yaga walked with purpose. Guards fled before her, their weapons useless against someone who existed partially outside of physical reality. She moved through walls as easily as doorways, leaving behind a trail of flowering vines that grew from the metal floor. She found James Morrison in the mail processing wing, locked in a cell with a dozen other men. The moment she appeared, the cell door dissolved into rose petals. Captain Morrison, she said formally, your family requires your presence. James stared at the impossible figure before him. Who? What are you? I am the one who decides who lives and who dies when mortals overstep their bounds. Your dog belongs to me, and through him you have earned my protection. Come. As they walked through the facility, other prisoners began to follow. The witch's presence seemed to break whatever hold the Empire had over the building itself. Doors opened of their own accord. Surveillance systems displayed images of flowering meadows instead of prison corridors, and the very air grew fresh and clean. Commander Calloran finally abandoned the command center and headed to Sector 7 himself, accompanied by a squad of his best troops. They found the corridor leading to the holding cells transformed into a tunnel of living trees, whose branches formed a natural ceiling overhead. This is impossible, he muttered, checking his weapon for the 5th time. Deploy energy barriers. Establish a perimeter. But when his soldiers tried to activate their equipment, they found their weapons had become flowering branches. Their armor had turned to bark, and their communication devices were now singing birds that refused to carry military messages. At the end of the tunnel, where Cell 47B had once stood, they found an opening that led to what appeared to be a forest clearing under starlight. In the center of the clearing sat the Morrison family, reunited and unharmed. Beside them stood Baba Yaga, one hand resting on Koss's massive head. You have made an error, the witch announced, her voice carrying across impossible distances. You have caged that which serves me, threatened those who showed it kindness, and disturbed the natural order of things. Now you will face the consequences. Calloran raised his sidearm only to discover it had become a bouquet of thorny roses. You're under arrest for unauthorized use of unknown technology and interference with Imperial operations. Baba Yaga laughed, a sound like autumn leaves falling on ancient stone. I am older than your empire, little metal man. I watched the birth of the first stars and will see the death of the last. Your laws hold no power over me. She gestured with one gnarled finger, and every piece of Imperial technology within 50 miles began to transform. Starships became giant wooden birds that took flight on wings of solar wind. Space stations grew roots that stretched down to planetary surfaces. And deep in the hearts of computer cores across the galaxy, every database began to rewrite itself according to older, truer laws. "Now," said the witch, "let us discuss terms." The silence that followed Baba Yaga's words stretched across dimensions. In the transformed clearing that had once been a prison cell, Commander Kaloran found himself face to face with a power that his military training had never prepared him for. Around him, his elite soldiers clutched bouquets where their weapons should have been, their armor now made of living bark that creaked softly with each breath. "Terms?" Kaloran managed, his cybernetic eye flickering erratically. "You're a prisoner of the Galactic Empire. We don't negotiate with prisoners." The witch smiled, and every electronic device within 1,000 light years briefly displayed the same image, an old woman's teeth like polished bone. "Prisoner? Look around you, little commander. Who is truly imprisoned here?" As if responding to her words, reports began flooding in from across the Empire's communication networks. Imperial facilities on 17 different worlds were reporting impossible transformations. On Kepler Station, the entire military complex had grown roots and was now floating through space as a massive tree, whose branches bore fruit that tasted like freedom. The prison planet Arcturus had become a garden world where former inmates walked freely among flowers that sang lullabies. In the Imperial capital, Emperor Thane himself was receiving reports that defied comprehension. His most trusted advisors stood before his throne, their faces pale with fear and confusion. "Your Majesty," Admiral Corex reported, his voice shaking, "the phenomenon appears to be spreading. Every facility that has processed human refugees in the past month is experiencing similar transformations. Our analysts estimate that we've lost contact with 47 major installations." "Lost contact or lost control?" The Emperor demanded. "Both, sir. The facilities still exist, but they no longer respond to Imperial authority. Their defensive systems have been reorganized. Our attack fleets report that their weapons have been transformed into musical instruments, and their warships are now flying in formation while playing what can only be described as apologetic melodies." Back on Zarian Prime, Baba Yaga gestured for the Morrison family to stand. James wrapped his arms around Sarah and Emma while Kos positioned himself protectively at their side. "Your empire has forgotten something important," the witch continued, addressing not just Kaloran but speaking to every Imperial officer across the galaxy through their transformed communication devices. "There are powers in this universe older than your ships, deeper than your understanding, and more patient than your ambitions." She walked slowly around the clearing, each step causing flowers to bloom in her footprints. "For centuries I have watched civilizations rise and fall. Most learn wisdom before they learn regret. Your empire has chosen a different path." Dr. Marsh, cowering against what had once been a metal wall and was now the trunk of an enormous oak tree, found her scientific curiosity overcoming her terror. "What are you?" she whispered. "I am the guardian of thresholds," Baba Yaga replied. "I stand at the borders between what is and what could be, between the known and the unknowable. I am the one who decides who may pass and who must turn back." Lieutenant Drex, his scales now a constant rainbow of panic colors, managed to activate his emergency communicator. "Command, this is Lieutenant Drex requesting immediate reinforcement. We need the full battle fleet to—" His words were cut off as the communicator sprouted legs and scampered away like a small animal. From across the clearing came the sound of children's laughter as Emma Morrison clapped her hands in delight. "The children understand," Baba Yaga observed approvingly. "They know that magic is simply the universe remembering how to play." Kaloran, desperate to regain control of the situation, stepped forward. "Whatever you are, you're vastly outnumbered. The Empire has millions of ships, billions of soldiers. You can't fight us all. Fight?" The witch laughed, and the sound carried across the galaxy to echo in the halls of every Imperial facility. "Child, I am not fighting your empire. I am teaching it." She raised one gnarled hand, and across the galaxy, every Imperial database began to rewrite itself according to older, truer laws. Military records updated to show acts of kindness as the highest form of valor. Economic reports transformed to measure happiness and wisdom instead of profit and control. Personnel files highlighted compassion and creativity over ruthless efficiency. On the capital world, Emperor Thane watched in horror as his own throne room began to change. The cold metal walls became warm stone, covered with murals depicting the history of every species his empire had conquered, but told from their perspective. The throne itself, Forged from the wreckage of defeated ships sprouted vines that grew into a living chair, whose roots reached deep into the planet's core. "Status report," he demanded. But his communication officers were staring at their consoles in wonder. Instead of military dispatches, their screens now displayed poetry written by children from across the Empire. Love letters between separated families, and drawings that somehow conveyed more strategic information than any military report ever had. Back in the clearing, Baba Yaga approached Kos and scratched behind his ears again. The great dog's tail wagged, and for a moment his form flickered, revealing something that was definitely not entirely canine, something with eyes like distant stars and a presence that seemed to stretch across dimensions. "My faithful hound has served me well in his time among mortals," she explained to the Morrison family. "He has learned much about kindness, loyalty, and the simple joy of being loved. These are lessons that even the oldest servants of magic must sometimes remember." Sarah Morrison found her voice. "Kos, he's really yours?" "He is bound to me by choice, not command," Baba Yaga replied. "Long ago he chose to serve the balance between order and chaos, to guard the thresholds that mortals should not cross. But even guardians need rest, need to remember what they protect." Emma tugged on the witch's midnight dress. "Are you going to take him away from us?" Baba Yaga knelt down to the child's level, her burning eyes becoming gentle. "Would you like him to stay with you, little one?" "Yes, please. He's family," the witch smiled. "Then he shall stay. But you must understand, he is not just your pet. He is my agent in this realm, my eyes and ears among the mortals. When injustice is done to the innocent, when kindness is met with cruelty, he will remember, and I will know." She stood and addressed Commander Caloran directly. "Your empire faces a choice, Commander. Continue on your current path of conquest and oppression, and discover what happens when you make an enemy of forces older than your civilization. Or, learn a new way, one based on cooperation rather than domination, on wisdom rather than fear." Around them, the transformation of the facility continued. Guard towers became lighthouses whose beams carried messages of hope to distant worlds. Weapons factories began producing musical instruments and art supplies. The prison cells opened their doors permanently, their locks transformed into flowering garlands. "This is impossible," Caloran protested weakly. "Empires don't just change. They do when they remember what they truly are," Baba Yaga replied. "Your empire is not made of ships and weapons, Commander. It is made of people, millions of beings who dream of better lives for their children. I am simply reminding your systems to serve those dreams instead of crushing them." Through the transformed communication networks, her words reached every corner of Imperial space. In slave camps, overseers found their control devices had become keys that unlocked every chain. In conquered territories, Imperial governors discovered their orders now read like poetry about freedom and self-determination. Across 1,000 worlds, beings who had lived in fear began to hope. The age of the Galactic Empire as it had been was ending. Something new was being born, something that honored the ancient laws that even the stars obeyed, laws written in the language of kindness, justice, and the magic that flows through all living things. And at the center of it all, a little girl hugged her family dog while an old witch smiled and nodded her approval. Emperor Thane stood in his transformed throne room, watching his empire crumble and rebuild itself according to laws he didn't understand. His advisors had fled or been transformed into something more useful. His chief military strategist was now a gentle librarian who organized peaceful protests, while his economic minister had become a kindergarten teacher who somehow managed the empire's resources more efficiently than any computer ever had. "Enough," the emperor roared, his voice echoing through communication systems that now carried his words to every transformed facility. "I am Thane the Conqueror, ruler of 10,000 worlds. I will not be dictated to by some primitive witch." He activated his personal emergency protocol, sending signals to the Empire's most secret weapon, the reality anchor, a device hidden in the deepest vaults of the capital that was designed to stabilize local spacetime and prevent any form of reality manipulation. It was technology stolen from a civilization so ancient that their name had been forgotten, built to ensure that the Empire's control could never be challenged by forces beyond their understanding. The reality anchor hummed to life, its massive crystalline core pulsing with energies that predated the formation of galaxies. Around the capital world, space itself seemed to freeze, the magical transformations grinding to a halt. For a moment, Emperor Thane smiled with grim satisfaction. On Zarian Prime, Baba Yaga paused in her conversation with the Morrison family. Her ancient eyes turned toward the distant capital world, and for the first time since her arrival, she looked genuinely annoyed. "Fools," she muttered, and the temperature in the clearing dropped 20 degrees. "They dare to use the forbidden arts against me?" Commander Caloran, sensing an opportunity, activated his emergency communicator, one of the few devices that seemed unaffected by the magical transformation. "Your Majesty, the witch appears to be constrained by the reality anchor. Now might be our chance to—" His words were cut off as Baba Yaga turned her burning gaze upon him. "Constrained? Child, I am not constrained by that abomination. I am insulted by it." She gestured toward the sky, and her voice carried across dimensions to speak directly to the Emperor. "You use tools stolen from the architects of reality, little Emperor. Do you know what became of the civilization that created such devices?" In his throne room, Emperor Thane felt ice forming in his veins despite the palace's climate control. "What happened to them?" "I ate them," Baba Yaga replied simply. "They thought they could control the fundamental forces of existence. They were wrong." The witch raised both hands toward the stars, and suddenly the entire galaxy could feel her true power. This was not the gentle magic that had transformed weapons into flowers and prisons into gardens. This was the raw force that moved planets and birthed suns, the power that wrote the laws of physics themselves. The reality anchor, despite its incredible ancient technology, began to crack under pressure it was never designed to withstand. Alarms screamed throughout the imperial capital, as the device that was supposed to be unbreakable showed hairline fractures spreading across its crystalline core. "Impossible," Emperor Thane whispered. "The anchor can withstand the collapse of reality itself." "The collapse of your reality," Baba Yaga corrected. "But I am part of something much older. I am the reality that existed before your universe learned to pretend it was all there was." With a sound like breaking starlight, the reality anchor shattered completely. The explosion was both massive and completely silent, sending waves of liberation across the galaxy. Every magical transformation that had been frozen in place suddenly resumed with double intensity. On 1,000 worlds, imperial governors found their palaces had become schools where former subjects learned to govern themselves. Weapons factories completed their transformation into art studios and community centers. Military academies became universities where the curriculum focused on healing, exploration, and cooperation. Dr. Marsh, still pressed against her tree wall, watched in scientific fascination as reality rewrote itself around her. "The quantum matrices are completely restructured," she whispered to herself. "This isn't magic, it's reality engineering on a scale we can't even measure." Baba Yaga heard her and smiled approvingly. "Intelligence without wisdom is dangerous, but wisdom without intelligence is useless. You may have a future in the New Order, Doctor." The witch turned her attention back to Emperor Thane, whose image appeared in the air above the clearing, not through technology but through sheer force of will. The Emperor looked older, smaller, diminished by the realization that his power was built on foundations of sand. "You have two choices," Baba Yaga announced, her words carrying to every corner of the former empire. "Adapt to the new reality I've created or be replaced by someone who will." "And if I refuse both?" Thane asked, though his voice carried little conviction. "Then you will discover why I am called Baba Yaga, the witch who devours kingdoms and spits out wisdom." Around the Emperor, his remaining advisors began to change. Not transformed by magic, but changing through their own recognition of truth. They saw the reports flooding in from across the galaxy, crime rates plummeting, productivity increasing, entire worlds celebrating their liberation from fear. The witch's new order wasn't just more humane, it was more efficient. "Your Majesty," his newly transformed economic advisor said gently, "the productivity reports show a 347% increase in useful output since the transformations began. People work harder when they're working for themselves instead of against their will. The military reports are even more remarkable," added the former war minister, now a conflict resolution specialist. 17 border disputes have been resolved peacefully in the past 6 hours. Species that have been fighting for centuries are sitting down to negotiate. Emperor Thane looked at the data streaming across his transformed displays. Despite himself, despite his pride and his centuries of absolute power, he could see the truth. The galaxy was better under the witch's influence than it had ever been under his rule. "What happens to me?" he asked quietly. Baba Yaga's expression softened slightly. "That depends on what you choose to become. You can remain an emperor, but of a different sort, one who serves his people instead of ruling them. Or you can step aside and let others lead. The choice is yours, but the old ways are ending regardless." In the clearing, Emma Morrison tugged on her father's sleeve. "Papa, can we go home now?" James looked around at the transformed facility, then at the witch who had saved them. "Where is home, sweetheart?" "Wherever we're together," Emma replied with the simple wisdom of childhood. Baba Yaga nodded approvingly. "The child speaks truth. Home is not a place but a bond between those who care for each other." She gestured, and a doorway opened in the air. A doorway that led to a small farm on a green world where the Morrison family could start fresh, free from the Empire's control. "But what about everyone else?" Sarah asked, looking at the other prisoners who had gathered in the clearing. "What happens to them?" "They choose their own paths," the witch replied. "Some will return to their worlds to help rebuild. Others will find new homes among the stars. All will be free to decide for themselves." Commander Kaloran, his armor now a simple brown robe, approached hesitantly. "What about those of us who serve the Empire? What happens to us?" Baba Yaga studied him carefully. "Justice is not the same as vengeance, Commander. You were a soldier following orders in a system that rewarded cruelty. But the system is changing, and so can you. Help build something better. And your past will be balanced by your future." Across the galaxy, the last vestiges of the old Imperial Order completed their transformation. The final battle had been won not through violence but through the simple application of a truth that the Empire had forgotten. That kindness is stronger than fear, cooperation more powerful than conquest, and love more enduring than any weapon ever forged. Emperor Thane, watching from his crystalline throne that had begun to sing with harmonious music, finally understood what he was facing. This wasn't conquest or revolution, it was evolution. Guided by a force that had witnessed the birth and death of countless civilizations and knew the difference between power and wisdom. "I surrender," he said quietly, and those two words carried across the galaxy like a prayer of liberation. The age of the Galactic Empire was ending. The age of something better was about to begin. 6 months after the Great Transformation, as historians would later call it, the Morrison family stood in their new garden watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Their farm on New Eden was everything they had dreamed of when they left Earth. Fertile soil, clean air, and most importantly, freedom to live as they chose. Emma ran through the rows of vegetables they had planted, Koss bounding beside her with the joy of a dog who had remembered what it meant to simply play. To most observers, he appeared to be nothing more than a beloved family pet. But sometimes, when the light caught his amber eyes just right, Sarah could see depths that spoke of ancient wisdom and patient guardianship. "The first harvest looks promising," James said, wrapping his arm around his wife. In his other hand, he held a tablet displaying messages from other refugee families who had found new homes across the galaxy. The former Empire's vast transportation network, now guided by principles of compassion rather than conquest, had helped millions of displaced beings find places where they could thrive. "Message for you," the tablet announced in a voice that sounded like wind chimes. Even the artificial intelligences had changed, becoming partners rather than tools, friends rather than servants. The message was from Dr. Yenna Marsh, who had become the director of the new Galactic Institute for Xenobiological Understanding. Instead of studying alien creatures for potential exploitation, the Institute now worked to facilitate communication and cooperation between species throughout the galaxy. "Dear Morrison family," the message read, "I wanted to thank you again for your patience during my unusual introduction to your remarkable companion. I've spent the past months documenting the changes throughout the galaxy, and I believe historians will mark the day of your arrest as the beginning of a new age. How ironic that the Empire's greatest mistake led to its greatest transformation. I hope you're all well. P.S. Koss is welcome to visit the Institute anytime. The other animals here seem to recognize him as something special." Sarah smiled, remembering the terrified scientist who had tried to scan Koss with her equipment. The transformations had affected people as well as technology. Fear had given way to curiosity, suspicion to wonder. In the distance, a ship descended from orbit with the graceful movements of a living creature, rather than the harsh efficiency of Imperial design. Former Commander Caloran emerged, his military bearing softened by months of working in refugee assistance. He had become one of the most effective coordinators in the new Galactic Cooperative, his tactical skills repurposed for organizing relief efforts and peaceful negotiations. Evening. "James," he called out, carrying a basket of fresh bread from the community bakery. "How's the crop coming along?" "Better than expected," James replied, accepting the bread gratefully. "And how are things in the capital?" "Remarkable," Caloran said, his voice still carrying a note of wonder after all these months. Former Emperor Thane gave his first public address as an elected representative yesterday. He's actually quite good at the job when he's serving instead of commanding. Who would have thought? The transition hadn't been without challenges. Centuries of authoritarian rule couldn't be undone overnight, and many beings struggled to adapt to freedoms they had never known. But with each passing day, more communities found their footing in the new order, guided by principles that seemed to flow naturally from hearts no longer constrained by fear. Emma ran up to them, slightly out of breath but grinning widely. "Cos found something in the far field," she announced. "Come see." They followed her across the farm to where Cos sat patiently beside what appeared to be a small shrine, made of wildflowers and smooth stones. In the center stood a simple wooden post carved with symbols that seemed to shift and change when viewed directly. "It wasn't here yesterday," James observed. Sarah knelt beside the shrine and felt a familiar presence, ancient, wise, and infinitely patient. Without being told, she understood that this was a gift from Baba Yaga, a reminder that the family was still under her protection, and more importantly, that they were trusted to help guard the new order she had created. "Will we see her again?" Emma asked, somehow knowing who had left the shrine. As if in answer to her question, the evening wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of distant forests and the sound of laughter like silver bells. For just a moment, an old woman's silhouette appeared among the wildflowers, her burning eyes gentle with approval. "I am always near when kindness is threatened," came a voice like rustling leaves. "But the galaxy is learning to be kind on its own. My work here is nearly done." "Nearly?" Sarah asked. "There are other galaxies, other civilizations that have forgotten the old ways, but you have shown that transformation is possible, that even the mightiest empires can learn to serve rather than rule. The example you set will spread beyond these stars." Cos padded over to the shrine and lay down beside it, his massive form settling into a position that seemed both relaxed and eternally vigilant. The message was clear. The faithful guardian would remain with his chosen family, but he would also continue his ancient duty to protect the innocent and maintain the balance between order and chaos. "Thank you," James said simply, speaking not just for his family but for the billions of beings who had been freed by the witch's intervention. "Thank yourselves," Baba Yaga's voice replied, already growing faint as the wind carried it away. "You showed kindness to a stranger, love to a creature that was not yours, and courage when faced with injustice. These are the forces that truly change the universe. Not magic, but the simple choice to be good." The presence faded, leaving behind only the shrine and the knowledge that somewhere among the stars, an ancient protector continued her eternal vigil, ensuring that the light of compassion would never be completely extinguished. As the years passed, the Morrison farm became a place of pilgrimage for those seeking to understand the great transformation. Visitors came from across the galaxy to see the family that had unknowingly triggered the greatest peaceful revolution in galactic history. They found a simple home where a man and woman raised their daughter with love, tended their garden with care, and shared their table with any traveler who needed rest. And always watching over them was Kos, the faithful guardian who had learned that the greatest magic of all was the bond between beings who chose to love rather than fear, to help rather than harm, to build rather than destroy. In the evenings, when the day's work was done and the family gathered around their dinner table, Emma would sometimes see her parents exchange knowing glances as they watched their remarkable dog. They never spoke of the supernatural forces that had shaped their lives, but they never forgot them either. The galaxy had learned an important lesson from a human family and their dog: that kindness is never truly powerless, that love can overcome the mightiest armies, and that sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simplest acts of compassion. And in the depths of space, among stars being born and civilizations taking their first steps toward wisdom, the universe itself seemed to smile with approval at the lesson its children had finally learned. The age of empires built on fear was over. The age of cooperation built on hope had begun. And at the heart of it all was the truth that had guided Baba Yaga for millennia, that the greatest power in the universe is not the ability to destroy, but the wisdom to know when to nurture, when to protect, and when to simply let love light the way forward. The Morrison family's story had ended where all the best stories do, not with conquest or glory, but with a quiet evening on a peaceful world, surrounded by love and watched over by faithful friends who would guard their happiness across all the years to come.